This is the story of a supergroup that probably shouldn't work on paper. A band born from a random meeting featuring a desert rock legend, a goth rock icon, and eventually a drummer who plays with the force of a human hurricane. This is a project that wasn't cooked up in a boardroom, it was forged in the weird, dusty margins of rock and roll, where the only rule was, there are no rules. So how did three of music's most unpredictable minds end up colliding, and what does that kind of accidental brilliance even sound like? Hey, my name is Anthony, this is My Kind of Weird, and today we're going to get into the story behind a musical project which included Marilyn Manson's bassist, the Godfather of desert rock, and the most chaotic drummer that music has ever seen, because this is the Goon Moon episode. Now, to really get into Goon Moon, you have to understand the completely different worlds its members came from. Around 2002, the heavy music scene was changing, and so were the lives of our key players. First up, you've got goth rock exile Jeordie, known to millions as Twiggy Ramirez. Now, for a decade, he was the iconic rail-thin, dress-wearing bassist and a main songwriting force for Marilyn Manson. He helped create some of the most defining and controversial music of the 90s, but after the Holy Wood album tour, White and Manson went their separate ways. It was a sudden end to one of modern rock's most famous partnerships. All at once, a musician who'd been at the chaotic heart of a global spectacle was adrift, looking for what to do next outside of the former band's long shadow. Then there's the desert rock visionary Goss. A legend in underground circles, Goss is the frontman for the criminally underrated Masters of Reality, and more famously the producer who basically midwifed the entire desert rock sound. He was the man behind the board for classic albums by Kyuss and later became a key producer for Queens of the Stone Age. Goss was a sonic guru, a master of tone and texture, celebrated for his talent for finding the psychedelic, soulful core of the heaviest riffs. It was about as far as you could get from the industrial shock rock world of Marilyn Manson that Twiggy, aka Jeordie, had just left. And finally, you have the guy who held the keys to both kingdoms, Josh Homme. As the leader of Queens of the Stone Age and the main hub of the Palm Desert scene, Homme had a unique view. He knew the genius of Goss, his mentor, and he also saw the untapped potential in Jeordie, who was a fan of Homme's work and now free from his old gig. Homme's whole philosophy, especially with his Freeform Desert Sessions project, was about introducing talented musicians to each other just to see what would happen. And he was about to make the most unlikely introduction of them all. Now, the meeting itself was incredibly simple. There was no big plans. Shortly after Jeordie left Marilyn Manson, Josh Homme made the connection that would spark everything. He put White and Goss in the same room, which turned out they were already fans of each other's music. Goss was impressed by White's songwriting in Manson, hearing a musical depth that went far beyond the usual stage antics that was normally associated with Marilyn Manson and co. White in turn revered and respected Goss as the architect of the desert sound that he loved. And this laid the groundwork for a partnership built on respect, but it also left a huge hanging question in the air. What on earth could these two sound like together? How do you possibly merge the glam goth and industrial sensibility of Marilyn Manson with the sun-baked, bluesy psychedelica of the desert? On paper, it was a total mismatch, a chemistry experiment that was just as likely to implode as it was to create gold. So the pair decided to find out where this would take them. With no pressure, no record label, and no real goal, they just started hanging out and playing music together. It was purely for the fun of it. As White would later put it, the project was a chance to explore different options musically, with a shared belief that anything goes. It wasn't an opportunity to try and be cool or be something they're not. It was a release, a way to escape the high-stakes worlds which they both came from. Now, the first taste of this pairing came back in 2005 with the mini LP I Got a Brand New Egg-Laying Machine. The title took its namesake from a quirky line in the 60s sitcom Green Acres, and is a perfect spoiler of the weirdness you'll find inside. The record's 10 tracks felt less like a formal album and more like a brilliant sketchbook of ideas. And this is where the problem of their clashing styles found its solution. The music was a strange and beautiful hybrid of everything they'd ever done, yet it sounded completely and totally new. You could hear White's gift for dark, catchy melodies, now free from an industrial cage, weaving through Goss's warm, layered, and trippy production. Songs would drift from gentle, folk-inspired moments into bursts of psychedelic noise without any warning. It was jarring and beautiful all at once, and this was the sound of two artists in a creative playground, breaking their own rules, and then breaking the new ones they just made. But I Got a Brand New Egg-Laying Machine didn't exactly top the charts. It was too strange and too all over the place. But for those who heard it, the album was a revelation. It proved Jeordie White was so much more than his Twiggy Ramirez alter ego, instead showing a vulnerable side to his songwriting that had been hidden. And it let Chris Goss stretch way beyond the desert rock label into his most experimental zones. Goon Moon worked because it wasn't trying to work, but the experiment wasn't over. It was about to get even more weirder. Now, as Goss and White started putting together a full-length follow-up, they decided to toss another volatile ingredient into the mix. If their creative process was already a controlled fire, they were about to add dynamite, and that dynamite was Zach Hill. At the time, Hill was famous as the drummer for the math rock duo Hella, and he had a reputation as being one of the most ferocious, innovative, and downright unhinged drummers on the planet. His style wasn't just about keeping time, it was a complex, explosive assault on the senses. A style that would eventually see him join explosive, punk rap industrial group Death Grips, in the far-off future that is. In the present, he played with a freedom that was pure chaos. For a project already built on an anything goes spirit, Zach Hill was the ultimate wild card. Now, bringing him in for what would become their first official LP wasn't just about hiring a session player, it was about recruiting a collaborator who would challenge the very DNA of their songs. And that's exactly what happened. Hill's frenetic, avant-garde drumming became a third essential voice on the album, adding a layer of thrilling and sometimes confrontational energy to the music. It was an interesting ingredient added to an already bizarre cocktail. Now, fast forward to 2007, Goon Moon unleashed its masterpiece of strange brilliance, the full-length album Liquor's Last Leg, which was released on the equally adventurous label Ipecac Records, which is no surprise given Mike Patton's penchant for the bizarre and strange. I mean, just look at his work with Phantomus or Tomahawk, or even his signing of longtime collaborator Buzz Osborne's band The Melvins. And then there's post-metal progressive sludge titans ISIS, and even electro-hip-hop group Dalek, who took their name from Doctor Who's arch nemesis. The list goes on. So with IPAC on board, this was it. It was the full realization of the Goon Moon experiment. All the separated pieces finally fused into this singular, bizarre, and beautiful whole. The album was a wild ride through genres and sonic textures. 1 minute you're hearing a fuzzed out stoner rock jam, the next a dark atmospheric pop song, then a blast of noisy experimental rock. The album even features a stunningly sincere and psychedelic cover of the Bee Gees song Every Christian Lion-Hearted Man Will Show You. A choice which feels so far out of left field and yet feels still so logical for this band. This record was filled with guest spots from friends like Josh Homme and drummer Josh Freese, cementing the Goon Moon spirit of community and collaboration. Liquor's Last Leg is this band's definitive statement. It's the sound of three musicians at the top of their game, completely free from expectations. White's melodic instincts, Goss's sonic tapestry, and Hill's rhythmic chaos created something truly one of a kind. It was praised by critics who actually got it as one of the most refreshing albums of that year, a project that was somehow both accessible and deeply weird. Now, if you're enjoying this deep dive into one of Rock's strangest collaborations, make sure you hit that subscribe button followed by the bell as I continue to explore with you the hidden histories and happy accidents behind the music you love every single week. Trust me, you don't want to miss next week's mystery band. Now, getting back to Goon Moon and speaking about their legacy, what happens after you create an accidental masterpiece? Well, usually you drift apart. But interestingly, Goon Moon never officially broke up. The project really just went quiet. On hiatus or shelved, if you want to call it that. It was what it was always supposed to be. A side project, a temporary creative escape. Jeordie White would eventually rejoin Marilyn Manson for a while and later tour with A Perfect Circle and 9 Inch Nails, while Chris Goss went back to his work as a legendary producer and with Masters of Reality. And finally, Zach Hill went on to co-found the groundbreaking and confrontational industrial hip-hop group, Death Grips, which is always turning heads. They all returned to their own corners of the music world, but the legacy of Goon Moon still lingers. For fans, it's a cult classic, an overlooked gem in the massive Queens of the Stone Age adjacent universe. For each of them, it was a vital moment of creative freedom. An escape. It gave Jeordie White the chance to prove his range as a songwriter, far beyond his famous Twiggy Ramirez persona. It gave Chris Goss a chance to create without the weight of being the Godfather of desert rock, and it gave Zach Hill the opportunity to turn up, let loose, and tear it up on the drum kit. It's proof that magic can happen when you put brilliant, seemingly mismatched people in a room and just hit record. All in all, this band was a happy accident born from a time of transition and a simple desire to make music for fun. It's a musical project that still seems to be quietly breathing, with White having uploaded unreleased demos to the internet over the years, like little echoes from that beautifully weird experiment. This story of Goon Moon is the perfect reminder that the most compelling art doesn't always come from a grand design or even a marketing plan. It comes from chaos, from friendship, and from the guts to ask, what if? It's what happens when a goth, a guru, and a madman walk into a studio, and the result is something that, even all these years later, sounds like nothing else. It's the sound of accidental brilliance.